I'm Melissa Muir. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to make a spoon ring using the super bender from Pepetools. Once you've identified the piece that you're going to work with, the next portion of the project is to measure out a ring shank. This is going to vary depending on the type of ring that you're going to be making. Some people like to make the rings so that they wrap around and kind of curl along the finger, or sometimes you can just make it so that it comes around and just kind of matches end to end, or even so that the thinner part comes in and wraps underneath the larger piece of your ring. So it just kind of depends on what you want. The thing that you'd want to do with this though is, let's say that you want to make a piece that's going to come end to end. You want to find out what your ring size is and get the inner diameter of that. You would multiply it by pi and then add a couple of extra millimeters for the thickness of your metal. If you want it to wrap around multiple times, again, you would multiply by pi, but then you would also add at least another 3/4 so that you have enough to come back around the ring, around your finger, and wrap up to the side of that. When determining how long to cut your shank, one thing that you can do if you don't have any other tools, such as a ring sizer or anything like that, you can actually take a piece of paper, wrap it around your finger, and then mark where the two pieces come together or overlap. So we would do this here. Now this is going to give me the inner diameter of my ring if I were to just wear this on my finger. However, the paper is quite a bit thinner than what our spoon is, so I would come in and add at least a few more millimeters to this measurement before I would cut this off. If I were to go and just go to this mark right here on my paper, my ring would not actually come together and meet at the ends because it did not take into account the thickness of our ring. If I wanted to make this so that this ring would wrap around my finger, and that is actually going to be one of your more forgiving styles, because if you make it too small, it's easy to widen it, or if it's too large, it's a little easier to kind of close it back down. But so let's say that I need something that's approximately 80 millimeters. So what I do is just line it up and come in with a marker or something like that and just mark where I want to cut the shank from my spoon, and then I will be left with a ring blank. So at this point, I'm going to take this over to my jeweler's saw and cut this off. Alright, so there are several different ways that you can cut this off. I prefer to use a jeweler's saw, so I will just place this onto here and begin my cut. Sometimes when you get to the end of this, it wants to kind of catch. So what you can do is just go ahead and continue to break that off. Now at this point, I need to clean this up, so I will just take a file, round off my edges, clean up any rough spots. Notice that I use the entire length of my file. That helps to ensure that I've got a nice rounded edge here. Okay, just feel, make sure that there's nothing rough. You always want to be very careful when you start to remove metal, because you will never be able to add it back on. You can always take extra away if it's necessary. Another thing to kind of consider too is, if you're not using a sterling shank, you may want to have a different set of tools like files and cutters, so that you don't end up contaminating your silver if you're working with sterling silver as well as other materials. To bend my ring shank, what I'm going to be using is a tool by Pepetools, and I love Pepetools. They are always so well machined, very precise in their milling and everything like that. The new super bender that we're going to be using here has an aluminum base that has been machined, and it holds everything nicely. Now if I wanted to, there are holes in the base here that correspond also to our main mechanism here, that you could actually take this mechanism and drill it into your bench and attach it to your bench top. But in case you don't want to do that, they've also included another piece that just screws in with some Allen screws, with an Allen wrench, and you can take this and place this into your bench, or your bench pin rather, and that is what I've opted to do on my studio, or in my studio. Now, the parts that come with this is we have 5 different circles, and they range from 12 to 22 millimeters. In addition, we have a 45 and a 60-degree angle benders, and this is going to allow you to create nice sharp bends in your material without necessarily having to cut them and solder them together. So it's a great option for you as well. Now, in addition to that, when I'm doing spoon rings, I don't want to mar my metal by using some of these dies and the circles or the angle pieces. So you can also purchase some of these pusher dies in Delrin, which is a really heavy duty nylon, and this will allow you to manipulate your metal without actually adding any nicks or bumps or marring the metal, and it's just another option that you would have in addition. And in the case of this spoon, I am actually going to use the Delrin dies because I want to preserve any of the detail that I have in my spoon. Attaching the tool into the bench is very simple. You're just going to place it right into here and tighten it up. This will hold everything nice and tight so that once I get my dies in place, I can insert my material, and then I can turn this handle either way, and you can see that it pushes this forward. So in this case, I'm going after approximately a size 6-7 ring, and that's approximately 16 millimeters. Now I happen to have a 16 millimeter circle and die or pusher, so I'll just insert the circle in here, place the die if you want the metal one, or like I said before, you can also use the Delrin die, and this will make it so that the die pushes forward onto the circle. The next thing we would want to do is place our metal in here. Now, if you want to have your ring so that it spirals up, then you want to make certain that you get this started on kind of a diagonal. And you'll have to kind of play around with it a little bit as well. But one thing that you can do, in this case, this ring has kind of a taper. So I could actually just set that taper down, and it's automatically going to create kind of a spiral effect for me just because of the angle that it's going to be bending. So that's one thing that you can do. And again, you'll just kind of have to play with it. I would highly suggest that perhaps you play with some scrap metal before you start into using one of your ring shanks cut off from a silver spoon. At this point, I'm ready to go ahead and start bending. I'm going to place the back side of this spoon handle into this. I'm going to also exaggerate that angle. Like I said, I could just go with the angle here, but I'm going to exaggerate it just to make certain that I actually get that spiral that I'm after. So I'll hold my piece into here and gently bring this around, and you can see that we have some of that bending action going on. Now, I did not start right here at the tip of my spoon, and a lot of times it's really difficult to kind of start at one of your ends, so a lot of times I will just kind of start just off of that, because you can see it kind of wants to push it out of the way. So now that I've got that, so the next thing I'm going to do is just continue to push and work the spoon in here. And like I said, it wants to kind of slip around and move a little bit, so you may have to kind of hold it in a little bit. Alright, so we're going to try this from a little different angle as well, but I wanted to show this to you. You can kind of see that things are starting to progress. We've got a nice curve in here, but it's also coming off at an angle, which is exactly what we want, so that we ensure that we continue to spiral up around the piece rather than have it just come straight around. And the Delrin is kind of slippery, especially when you have a thicker piece of material. So you may have to just kind of play with it a little bit. I find that if I come to the next straight spot and push from there, it will allow me to get a better curve, and then I can come back in and tighten up any of the flat spots that might still be left. So again, we can see here this curve that's starting to happen. We can see that it's coming off at an angle. Continue. And once you get to this point where the ring has kind of wrapped itself around and you still have more, I find that it's helpful to pull the ring off the top and continue to kind of bring this around. It's a little tricky to hold sometimes, but again, you can start to see how this is starting to wrap around onto itself. If you need to, kind of tweak it a little bit, which is easier said than done because it has now work hardened. I'm just going to kind of pull this apart a little bit. You can get some pliers. Just make sure that you put some cloth on your metal so that you don't mar it. Just kind of pull it to the sides a little. So here I've just pulled them apart just a little bit more so that it's easier for me to get this to bypass. I'm going to put this again in here. Notice that I'm keeping the tip of this off so that that way everything will kind of come in and bend around. As you get to the point where the spiral needs to come and wrap around to its side, the curled end is going to hinder that. So I find that if I pull that part off and then just place where it's flat up against the mandrel, then I can come in and get the last little bit of it to kind of round out a bit. And sometimes it's a little easier said than done. And then once you have that, you can place it back on the mandrel and tighten everything up. At this point, we now have a ring that spirals around, and if you wanted to, you could take a file and kind of finesse the curve that's on this end that has been cut off. But other than that, it's time for your final polish and wear your ring with pride. If you were to make a ring that wraps around itself, then you'll want to follow a similar process. It's just that you want to make certain that when you start your bend that it's going to be straight. So that way everything comes around and centers back off to the point here. Now because this metal is a little bit thicker, it is going to take a little bit more pressure for me to actually get this to bend. However, this tool makes it so that I don't have to put too much effort into that. So it's kind of nice that way. So again, I'm not going to start by trying to bend from the tip, because what will happen is it's just going to fall right into that groove and it'll slip right out. So I come in so that I'm just a little bit beyond, and it has no choice but to actually start to bend here. So I'm going to get everything in here, make sure that it's lined up so that when I start this, I'm not off to the side at all or at an angle. I want to make sure I'm straight on. Okay, give a little bit of pressure here. Move to the next spot. Again, push around to the next flat spot. Push around. And you'll notice that it is kind of, we've got some little jagged edges here. And what you will do is afterwards, you'll just come back in and wrap those again so that it kind of rounds and smooths that all out. Make sure I'm still coming here straight on. When you get to the end like this, it gets very difficult because you lose your leverage. Whenever you try to bend your piece, all that's going to happen is it's going to kind of slide forward. So when I have this, then what I do is I'll just put this into here, and then I will use this as kind of a vise. And then I can use my rawhide mallet to come in and close the end of my ring. And it's just going to take a little bit of coaxing. So once I have it where it's pretty much able to get back into this, then I will take my ring bender and just come in and finally give that final little push where it closes and rounds things off for the tip. And at this point, I'm actually ready to move this to a smaller die and continue to size this so that it would fit me more appropriately, and it will close that gap up as well. So I move to the next smaller die, place my ring on, and tighten up the ring by just going around. Like such. And there you have your ring.